The Snow Elves built one of the most advanced civilizations in Tamriel before humanity even arrived on the continent, and then the Dwemer convinced them to poison themselves into extinction. From elegant architects who lived alongside early Nordic settlers, to the twisted, eyeless Falmer crawling through every dungeon in Skyrim. And we know exactly how it happened, but nobody can agree on why, starting with the poison that destroyed an entire race, the Falmer poison. The Snow Elves once lived peacefully across Skyrim, trading with the first Atmaran colonists, but that peace shattered during the Night of Tears, when the elves destroyed the human city of Sarthal. The official story says it was jealousy over human expansion. The real story, the elves attacked because the Nords discovered the Eye of Magnus buried beneath the city, a magical weapon that threatened everyone. Isgramor returned from Atmora with 500 warriors and waged a genocidal reconquest that drove the Snow Elves to the edge of extinction. The survivors, desperate and hunted, turned to the only people who might shelter them, the Dwemer. The dwarves agreed to take them in on one condition. They had to eat a toxic fungus that would make them blind forever. And here's the thing, the elves knew. They understood that eating this fungus meant permanent blindness, that their children would be born without sight, that they would never see the sun again. They accepted the bargain anyway, because the alternative was death on the surface. Over generations, the fungus and underground isolation transformed them. The proud Snow Elves devolved into the hunched feral Falmer you fight in every Dwemer ruin. Pale skin stretched over twisted frames, exaggerated hearing to compensate for lost vision, a brutal, animalistic culture built on slavery and violence. When you meet Gelibor and Verthur and Dawnguard, you're seeing what the Falmer used to be, which makes what they became even more horrifying. But here's where it gets weird. No text in the game ever names the specific fungus. The community assumes the glowing mushrooms in Blackreach are related, but the game never confirms it. We don't know the exact chemistry or how it was prepared, we just know it worked, and it was hereditary, and it destroyed them completely. The real mystery isn't whether the poisoning happened, it's why the Dwemer demanded it in the first place. The simplest explanation is control. Blind refugees can't stage an uprising in a city full of traps and machinery designed for sighted engineers. The Dwemer were paranoid rationalists who saw other races as threats or tools. Blinding the Snow Elves guaranteed they'd remain dependent and harmless, but some theories go deeper. The Dwemer were obsessed with tonal architecture, manipulating reality through sound and mathematics. They built Numidium, a god machine designed to rewrite existence. So what if the fungus wasn't just a poison? What if it was a tool? Some analyses argue the fungus severed the Falmer's connection to Auriel, cutting them off spiritually and making them malleable, a biological experiment run parallel to their mechanical ones. If that's true, the Falmer weren't refugees. They were test subjects, and that's the part nobody can prove. The Dwemer left no confession, no journal explaining their choice. They vanished during the Battle of Red Mountain, taking their motives with them. The only surviving Dwemer, Yagrum Bagern, was in an outer realm when it happened and knows nothing about the Falmer program, so we're left with a well-documented atrocity and an occluded motive. The uncertainty means we can't even assign meaning to the suffering. It might have been pragmatic cruelty, or it might have been a grand metaphysical experiment. We'll never know, but if you think one genocidal poisoning is disturbing, wait until you hear about the assassin cult that worships the Void and takes orders from a talking corpse. The truth of the Night Mother. The Night Mother is either the most important figure in the Dark Brotherhood or the biggest con in Tamriel, and I can prove it. Here's the thing, according to the Night Mother's truth, she was a real person, a mortal Dunmer woman, a senior Morag Tong assassin living in a village where Bravil now stands. One night, Sithis himself supposedly commanded her to murder her own 5 children as an offering. She did it, cut them down in their beds. The villagers found out, lynched her, burned the house to ash. Years later, a man started hearing voices from beneath the ruins, the murdered children whispering from beyond death. He became the first listener, and the Dark Brotherhood was born. That's the official story. A human sacrifice cult founded by a filicidal lunatic who heard the Void talk. But here's where it gets weird. The Night Mother you meet in Skyrim is a talking corpse, a desiccated body in a sarcophagus that speaks directly into your head, issues contracts across continents, and knows things no single dead Dunmer assassin could possibly know. She has reach, she has continuity, she has knowledge that spans eras. That doesn't track with murdered mom from a burnt village, so either the Bravil story is complete propaganda, or something else is wearing her corpse like a mask. The leading theory is Mephala, Daedric prince of secret murder, plots, and lies. Mephala used to run the Morag Tong directly, but when Vivek took control of the Tong as part of the tribunal's political apparatus, Mephala lost her official murder network, creating a rival organization under a new identity outside Morrowind, using the Night Mother persona as a front. That's textbook Mephala behavior. The voice listeners hear isn't a ghost. It's a Daedric prince running a franchise operation. Another reading treats the Night Mother not as an individual, but as a recurring archetype, a role that different mortal women have filled across eras, each becoming the vessel for the Void's will. The body in Skyrim could be the Breville woman's remains, but the consciousness speaking through it is the collected essence of every Night Mother who came before. Which version is scarier? That a woman really murdered her children because a god told her to, and her tortured soul still runs a murder cult centuries later? Or that the entire origin story is Daedric propaganda, a mythic mask worn by an alien intelligence manipulating assassins for millennia? The fact that there's no neutral source on the Night Mother's identity is the point. The Dark Brotherhood doesn't want clarity. They want belief. Whether she's a deified human, a Daedric prince, or an abstract void construct doesn't matter to the faithful. She speaks, they listen, people die. At least the Night Mother has a name and a backstory you can argue about. The next mystery doesn't even have that. The identity of the Bug Outer. Here's the thing. The Bug Outer does not exist. At least not in any lore book, quest dialogue, or developer-authored text you can point to. There is no shrine to the Bug Outer, no faction worshipping it, no ancient scroll warning of its arrival. It is a purely fan-constructed entity, emergent mythology the community invented to explain something Elder Scrolls has in spades. Bugs. Software bugs. The kind where a giant flies backward through a mountain, or a guard tries to arrest you from inside a cooking pot. The concept plays on all the recurring insect imagery in the series: moth priests communing with ancestor moths, silt striders stomping across Morrowind, beetles in jars hidden throughout Skyrim. So when players encounter glitches that break reality, some joker somewhere said, "Must be the Bug Outer," and the name stuck. A chaos god of engine failure, a patron saint of physics going haywire, the deity you pray to when your horse launches into orbit. Some lore hobbyists have tried to formalize this into actual Elder Scrolls cosmology. They point to Sheogorath, whose shivering isles bend or outright break the rules of reality in ways that feel suspiciously mechanical. They reference Chaim and the Godhead, the meta framework where all of Orbis is a dream. If the gods in Daedra are patterns inside that dream, then maybe there could be an entity operating at the level of the dream's code itself. The Bug Outer becomes a tongue-in-cheek name for that imagined meta-presence, the thing that glitches the Godhead's unconscious and makes NPCs vibrate through walls. But here's the kicker. Even that interpretation is fan-made. The Bug Outer has zero textual grounding. It is not a mystery the lore presents. It is a mystery the community invented because the games are messy and players wanted a diegetic explanation for their immersion breaking in half, which honestly is more interesting than if Bethesda had written it themselves, because the fact that fans built an entire mock mythology around software bugs says something real about how Elder Scrolls works as a franchise. The series leaves enough gaps, enough contradictions, enough inexplicable weirdness that players actively create new lore to fill the void. They personify glitches. They take a typo in an obscure book and spin it into a 3-hour video essay. The Bug Outer is the ultimate example of that process, a joke that became a theory that became, in some corners, a quasi-canonical meme, and in a weird way, that mirrors Lorcan's own role in creation. He reshaped the Orbis by insisting something could exist, even when it shouldn't. Players do the same thing. They take a broken game, a missing explanation, and say, no, this means something. The Bug Outer is not in the lore, but the impulse that created it absolutely is. The fate of the Nerevarine. One of the most consequential mortals in Tamrielic history just vanishes into a single line of town gossip, and nobody seems to care. The Nerevarine, reincarnation of Indoril Nerevar, protagonist of Morrowind, defeated Dagoth Ur, shattered the Tribunal's false godhood by severing their connection to the heart of Lorcan, and reshaped Morrowind's entire religious and political landscape. Then they disappear from the record entirely. The only post-game mention is a throwaway NPC line in Oblivion. Rumor has it the Nerevarine has left Morrowind on an expedition to Akavir and has not been heard from since. That's it. delivered with the same weight as bandit sightings. The 3rd edition pocket guide to the Empire adds that whether the figure who arrived in Morrowind was truly Nerevar reborn cannot be known, and that the repercussions of that arrival may not yet be fully realized, preserving ambiguity about both identity and consequence. The most straightforward reading takes the Akavir rumor at face value. The Nerevarine led an expedition to the mysterious continent east of Tamriel, and their story continues off-screen, waiting for a future game that never arrives. But here's the thing, the rumor's presentation as casual town gossip makes many lore scholars distrust it entirely. It's never substantiated by quests, letters, or subsequent references in Skyrim, which takes place decades later. No one shows up with a journal. No one confirms anything. It's just hearsay, and not particularly convincing hearsay at that. A more thematically satisfying theory posits the Nerevarine achieved apotheosis, following the pattern of Tiber Septim and the Tribunal before them. Having fulfilled the prophecies surrounding Nerevar's return, defeated a god, and interacted directly with the heart of Lorkhan, the Nerevarine would be well positioned to ascend or disappear into a higher metaphysical state. This reading fits the series' broader pattern of turning player characters into quasi-mythic figures whose later fates are shrouded in legend. However, unlike Tiber Septim, the Nerevarine has no worship cult or divine recognition in later eras, which weakens this reading considerably. No shrines, no prayers, nothing. Then there's the more creative fan theory that the Nerevarine spent their post-game life investigating the disappearance of the Dwemer, driven by Nerevar's ancient grief over Dumak Dwarf King, his old ally from the First Council. The Nerevarine, as Nerevar reborn, would carry that unresolved tragedy. They have intimate knowledge of Kagranak's tools and the heart. The idea of them traveling across Tamriel or even outside Mundus, following traces of Dwemer presence, with the Akavir rumor as misdirection or mishearing, is compelling, but it has no direct textual support. It's pure narrative extension, chosen for its emotional weight rather than its evidentiary basis. What we know for certain is this: the Nerevarine accomplished everything during Morrowind, then exited history through a fog of vague rumors and cryptic hints. Bethesda's choice to leave this open is deliberate. A vanished, possibly immortal Nerevarine maintains the cosmic weight of everything they did. Giving them a mundane ending, a confirmed death, or even a heroic last stand would diminish it. The mystery preserves the scale, but if you think one disappeared hero is unsettling, wait until you hear about an entire race that blinked out of existence in a single instant: the disappearance of the Dwemer. In 1E700, during the Battle of Red Mountain, every single Dwemer on the planet vanished. Not just in Morrowind. Every Dwemer in Skyrim, Hammerfell, everywhere, gone in the same instant. Their cities were left intact, their machines still running, food still on the table. An entire civilization blinked out mid-battle, and the coffee is still warm. Here's the thing, this wasn't a plague, wasn't a gradual decline, wasn't an evacuation. One moment, thousands of Dwemer were fighting, working, living. The next, zero. The only physical Dwemer who survived is Yagrum Bagarn, and he only made it because he happened to be in an outer realm when it happened. He came back to find his entire race gone. Now he's bloated, afflicted with corpus disease, living in a Telvanni tower in Morrowind as the loneliest being alive. The last proof his people existed. So what happened? We know the trigger. Kagranak, the Dwemer tonal architect, had spent years crafting 3 tools: Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard, specifically to tap the heart of Lorkhan buried beneath Red Mountain. The goal was to use its divine power to animate Numidium, a colossal brass golem, and achieve collective Dwemer apotheosis. Become gods, basically. At some critical moment in the battle, Kagranak activated his tools on the heart. Every Dwemer disappeared. The exact mechanism is where it gets weird. The leading theory, the zero-sum hypothesis, holds that when Kagranak struck the heart, the Dwemer collectively achieved Chime, the realization that they were constructs within the Godhead's dream. But here's the kicker. As rationalists, they couldn't accept the paradox of being both unreal and self-aware. They refused to assert their existence in defiance of that logic. So, they zero-summed. They erased themselves from reality. This explains why there are no Dwemer ghosts. No afterlife presence, nothing. They didn't die. They stopped existing. An alternative theory suggests they succeeded, that the Dwemer didn't vanish, they merged, their essence uploaded into Numidium, the brass god, as a distributed machine consciousness. Every later activation of Numidium by Tiber Septim during the warp in the west briefly reawakens a fractured echo of Dwemer minds. In this version, they didn't fail. They became the god they were trying to build. The more conservative reading treats it as a catastrophic miscalculation. Kagranak's tonal tools were designed to manipulate the fundamental sounds of reality around the heart, but instead, they annihilated annihilated Dwemer souls specifically. Their bodies, buildings, automatons all stayed, but the souls? Gone, which is why you never see a Dwemer spirit anywhere in the afterlife, and why Yagrum survived. He wasn't on Nirn when the tools fired. The mystery sits in a perfect design sweet spot. We know who, we know when, we know where. The Battle of Red Mountain, 1E700, Kagranak's tools, the heart of Lorcan. The exact metaphysical mechanism is intentionally withheld, which means every Dwemer ruin you walk into is permanently haunted by a question no scholar can answer. Did they erase themselves? Did they ascend? Did they miscalculate and scatter their souls across the fabric of Nirn? We'll never know for certain, and that's the point. But if you think a race vanishing in an instant is disturbing, wait until you hear about the apocalyptic orb buried under Skyrim that nobody can explain. The mystery of the Eye of Magnus. One buried orb set off centuries of catastrophe. The Eye of Magnus, a massive glowing sphere unearthed beneath Sarthal by the College of Winterhold, didn't just cause the Night of Tears. It caused everything that followed. The Snow Elves attacked Sarthal to seize it, which triggered Ysgramor's genocidal reconquest, which forced the Falmer into their desperate bargain with the Dwemer, which turned them into the blind horrors we find in Skyrim. All of that because someone dug up the wrong artifact, and nobody in the entire game can explain what it actually is. Here's where it gets weird. During the college questline, when Thalmor agent Ancano tries to tap into the Eye's power, it begins destabilizing Winterhold and threatening to unravel reality. The only group capable of containing it is the Psijic Order. Mages so advanced they can edit time and rewrite causality. They teleport the Eye to an undisclosed location and refuse to elaborate. If the Psijics, who treat most magical crises as minor inconveniences, are this alarmed, the Eye isn't just powerful, it's existentially dangerous. The name Eye of Magnus is a guess. College scholars slapped that label on it because of its raw magical aura, not because Magnus himself showed up and confirmed anything. The leading theory holds that the Eye is literally a fragment of Magnus, the At'Ada who designed Mundus and fled back to Aetherius, tearing a hole that became the sun. In this reading, concentrated divine essence coalesced and fell into Nirn during his escape, but there is zero in-game confirmation of this. It's thematically compelling and fits the symbolism, but nobody actually knows. A second theory treats the Eye as an ethereal gateway, a poorly shielded portal to the plane of pure magical energy. The surges, the reality warping effects, the way it nearly destroys Winterhold when misused, all of that aligns with a direct conduit to infinite magicka. This would make the Eye a secondary valve in the fabric of Mundus, one that anyone with sufficient knowledge could open or close. If accurate, the Snow Elves weren't trying to steal a relic, they were trying to control a weapon of mass unmaking. Then there's the Tower Theory. Some lore analysts connect the Eye to the mythic structures that stabilize Mundus against dissolution. In this view, the Eye is either a dormant tower stone or an anti-tower capable of unmaking creation when activated. That would explain why ancient peoples buried it, and why civilizations have gone to war over it repeatedly. The fact that Ancano's attempt to harness it nearly collapsed Winterhold supports the cosmic lever interpretation. But again, this is inference. No book spells it out. The most unsettling detail is the script on the Eye's surface. The glyphs orbiting the orb belong to no known alphabet. Not Daedric, not Eliadun, not Dwemerus. No cipher has ever been provided, which suggests either a pre-creation origin or a deliberate signal that this object is beyond any current scholarly framework. You can't translate something written before language existed, but at least the Eye was buried deep enough that it only destroyed one civilization at a time, unlike the place every elf claims to come from but can't prove ever existed, the land of Aldmeris. In Orthodox Altmeri history, Aldmeris is a real continent, Old Elnofi, the ancestral homeland where every single elven race originated before sailing away to colonize Somerset, Valenwood, High Rock, everywhere else. The entire foundation of elven identity traces back to this one place. Specific details exist in the historical record. High Lord Toranon fled Aldmeris to escape a crisis described as Doom Oblivious, landed on Auradon, and swore never to leave. Other fleets settled Pyandonea to the south, their descendants becoming the Marmor. Real ships, real people, real migrations. Except here's the problem. Even basic facts like where Aldmeris was located, what it looked like, what happened to it, are flagged as matters of conjecture in modern scholarship. Nobody knows. Nobody can agree. The entire geographic anchor of elven history is a maybe. A radically different interpretation, found in Moth Priest adjacent lore, holds that Aldmeris never existed as a physical continent at all. It's a shared ancestral memory of the mythic era, a mnemonic construct construct representing the pre-Mundic state when elven ancestors were still close to the Ada in Aetherius, before the creation of Mundus trapped them in mortal form. In this reading, when Altmer talk about Aldmeris, they're not describing a place. They're describing a state of being, a time when they were closer to gods. The homeland isn't geography. It's nostalgia for divinity they lost the moment they agreed to exist in linear time. A third interpretation frames Aldmeris as deliberate nationalist mythology, a fabricated ideal homeland invented by the Altmer to justify racial hierarchy and cultural supremacy, in which case the concrete historical details, Tornan's fleet, the Doom Oblivious crisis, all of it are later retrojections onto an originally abstract concept. Exactly as real-world nations generate founding legends, the Altmer needed a pure origin point to explain why they're better than everyone else, so they built one retroactively and called it history. If this is true, then every claim to elven superiority, every justification for looking down on humans and beastfolk, rests on a place that never existed. A synthesizing position holds that Aldmeris was a real physical place, but has been mythologized beyond recovery. Analogous to Yokuda, once a real continent, later destroyed and submerged, leaving only fragments and legends. Its actual history erased by the continent-shattering magical warfare of the Dawn and Merethic eras, wars between proto-elves and the ancestors of men that literally broke continents and remade coastlines. In this model, Aldmeris is both a real lost homeland and a mythic symbol. Its dual nature reflects the blurred boundary between history and myth in the early ages. You can't separate the two anymore. The stakes of this mystery are enormous for how you read elven identity in the entire franchise. If Aldmeris is a literal lost homeland, then elven decline is a diaspora with a geographic anchor. Their glory days happened in a specific, materially existing place, and their current situation is exile. But if it's a metaphysical memory of pre-Mundic existence, then every Altmeri claim to superiority is really grief for a state of being that all mortals abandoned when they chose creation. The homeland isn't a continent they left, it's divinity they gave up. And if it's propaganda, if Aldmeris is a deliberate myth to justify hierarchy, then the entire Altmeri social structure is built on a lie they tell themselves. A fantasy of purity that never existed except as an idea. The ambiguity appears intentional, forcing players to confront how cultures construct their own pasts to justify present realities, making Aldmeris as much a commentary on real-world nationalism as a piece of fantasy geography. But if you think a homeland that may or may not have existed is unsettling, wait until you hear about the god who may or may not have created the universe on purpose. The true nature of Lorcan. Every mystery we've covered so far has one thing in common. They're all threads in a tapestry Lorcan may have woven on purpose. Lorcan, also known as Shor, Shizar, and Sep, is the spirit who proposed and orchestrated the creation of Mundus, convincing or tricking other Ada to invest their divine essence into the mortal plane. For that, he was dismembered as punishment, his heart hurled down to Nirn, where it struck the earth and created Red Mountain. That much is agreed upon. But ask whether he was a hero or a villain, and the answer depends entirely on who's telling the story. Human traditions universally cast him as heroic or necessary, a divine rebel who enabled mortal existence, struggle, and transcendence. Sometimes he's framed as a Christ-like martyr whose self-sacrifice made the world possible. Elven traditions, especially Altmeri, cast him as a deceiver who trapped them in the prison of mortality and deserved his punishment. Even within human traditions, the accounts fragment. Redguard myths recast him as Sep, a lesser spirit whose flawed world is a test mortals must endure. Nordic stories worship Shor as a war god whose absence from Sovngarde is a wound in reality. Cyrodiilic theology downplays him almost entirely while embedding his blood in the Amulet of Kings. His heart's ongoing presence in Nirn has driven the most catastrophic events in recorded history. The Dwemer mined it. Kagrenak built tools to weaponize it. The Tribunal used those tools to make themselves gods. Azura cursed the Chimer into Dunmer in response, and the Nerevarine eventually severed all connections to it. Yet some close readings of Morrowind's ending and subsequent lore suggest the heart itself was never destroyed, only its enchantments broken. Hints in Apocrypha content suggest Hermaeus Mora may have since secured the heart, with certain quests and fan analyses pointing to an audible heartbeat in the prince's realm, meaning the most most dangerous divine artifact in existence may currently belong to the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge. But here's where it gets truly metaphysical. The meta-lore layer, authored by developers and elaborated by fans, frames Lorcan's role through Kim and the Godhead. If all of Orbis is a dream of an unconscious, unknowable being, then Lorcan may have deliberately designed Mundus as a training ground where spirits learn to individuate and suffer enough to eventually achieve Chayem, the realization that one is part of a dream, met with a defiant "I am" rather than self-erasure. In this most esoteric reading, his punishment and his status as the missing god are not a tragedy, but a deliberate self-sacrifice. He removed himself from the equation so that mortals could reach Amaranth, the creation of an entirely new dream outside the Godheads, without his interference skewing the outcome. The reason Lorcan's nature remains unsolved is because resolving it definitively would require choosing one racial mythology as true and the others as false, collapsing the entire design philosophy of the franchise. The universe is built on contested stories: the Falmer poison, the Night Mother, the vanished Dwemer, the Eye of Magnus. Every mystery we've examined exists because the foundations themselves are open to interpretation. And the most important story, the one about why any of this exists at all, was never meant to have a single answer. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.